Just unmuting myself here, Jeff. Thank you very much for your introduction. Look, I'd like to say thanks to you, but also especially to Hugh and his team. I think the Motor Heritage Foundation is a fantastic. Can you hear me? Yes, yes. I think it's a fantastic initiative, and I think the objective to make it a truly national initiative and an international linkage is going to be a success. And I really appreciate that some of my European friends will perhaps get a bit of insight into what we've been doing down here in Australia while they've been doing fantastic things in the Northern Hemisphere. As Jeff said, my history started when I was a teenager, and it continues. And on the front screen there, this is probably a summary of the story. The top left-hand photograph is me and my TC with an incomplete body racing at Lanark Park near Adelaide in South Australia, which was an MG Car Club circuit at Mount Compass. It's where I learned to drive properly, because on a dirt track you really do learn to drive. It's just like driving in England in wet, and Barry Cannell is an expert in that. So that's where I learned to drive an MG. And down in the right-hand corner is the K3 at Brands Hatch in the UK, a famous track. And I'm racing with the HGPCA, and Barry, who I mentioned, was a former long-term chairman of HGPCA, and I'll talk more about that as we go on. So thank you for inviting me, and I thought that what I should do is explain perhaps how I got started here. And for those of you who don't know, I'm going to give you a short history lesson on the importance of the MG mark, and then I'll talk about racing in Europe. So I got started, as a lot of us did. I guess almost everybody on this call will have a story like this, but we had a special advantage in South Australia. We got to get our driver's licenses at the age of 16. And in order to be able to drive from an early age, I found two friends who had like minds. One by the name of Jeffrey Ross and the other by the name of Jeffrey Gaskell. And they may well be on this call. I'm not sure if they are. But the photograph with the L plate is me, aged 15 years and 9 months, learning to drive in a 1926 Essex. And I was comforted because I had such an experienced driver next to me, my 6-month older friend, and off we went into the Adelaide Hills in the car, which had very little brakes, but it did teach you to use the gearbox properly. Anyway, this was how we got started, and I guess you guys all, and ladies, probably all got started like this. We had my first joint venture of 3 people. Our fathers said it would never work, and it would destroy our friendship. Well, I'm pleased to say those 2 young men are now old men, and they're still my friends, and hopefully they're on this call today. But we found that the Essex had limitations. It had speed limitations, and it definitely had accommodation limitations. And we felt, because of the social situation we found ourselves in, we needed to be able to carry more people. And that's where the Buick came in, and that was a wonderful piece of equipment. Vastly underestimated. Don't be too snobby about American iron. A 1928 Buick is a serious motor car. However, and I proved that because I bought another one about 15 years ago and I've still got it. Okay, that's how I got started. Next slide, Emily, please. And when the 3 of us left school, so we had 2 years of driving our cars to school. Can you believe how good we felt we were? But come the end of school, we all thought we needed a car for ourselves. Well, we branched out. One bought a Morgan, one bought an Alvis, and one bought an MG, and that was me. You could see we left the American brands behind, and the Alvis man is still an Alvis man. He's got a 1250 and a number of other bits and pieces of Alvises. But what it did for us is we learned how to fix things. And the way we got linked into that is probably, again, an amazing story. Tony Olmeyer, who was the MG tuner of South Australia, very well known, who used to race before the war, but became the mechanical guru for MGs. His garage was right opposite our scout hall. Our scoutmaster was Bill Byfield, who had Amilcars and Lanciers, and he was in the VSCC. I think scoutmasters and garages like that don't exist anymore. But Tony Olmeyer was very kind to us, and he sold us that Essex for £2. And of course, that was 13 and 4pence each. But it did have a few flaws and we had to fix them. But he loaned us the tools and was very good to us. Anyway, that's how we got started. The man in the middle there is Giovanni Pagnusat. And he was a brilliant Italian bodybuilder, and he worked in his backyard in Adelaide. And again, he helped us a lot. And he rebuilt 2 MGs, a TF and an L-type, but also rebuilt the body on the racing car. I won't keep every slide as long as this one, but the top left corner is very significant because that's the first K3 I ever saw. And Tony Olmeyer was the mechanical restorer of that, and John Pagnusat built the body. It had been the ex-Billy Cotton car. It's quite a famous car in Britain, and it came to Australia after the war, and it had one of those terrible fiberglass bodies put on it. But the owner then, Frank Bett from Sydney, commissioned Olmeyer and Pagnusat to rebuild the car. And that car is, fortunately, after some very tender loving care by subsequent owners, is now in the ownership of Ross Kelly in Queensland, and he is actually on this call. Emily welcomed him a few minutes ago. So, can you see the string? I mean, it's lucky, and I guess a lot of us have had a bit of luck with the right people in our lives to get us going. Next slide, please. The TF had its limitations, and in the first year, I broke the gearbox 3 times. And Tony Olmeyer said to me, "Oh, son, what are you doing with this car? You know, do you want to go racing or something, son?" Oh, I said, "Yeah, I think I probably do." He said, "Well, you got the wrong car." He said, "I know where there's a good one." And he sent me off to a place where the car that I still own, the ex-David Harvey, Jack Brabham MGTC, chassis number 4472, had just exited its what I call its first life, and it was ready for somebody to look after it. Well, I'm not sure that was exactly us in 1967, but you can see the sequence of pictures here. There's Lanark Park at the top. There's Jack O'Day at Rob Roy, just before the Australian Grand Prix. Reputedly, it's the only time he drove the car before the Grand Prix. And the bottom right-hand corner is the winner, just somewhat disputed winner, I might say, of the 1953 Grand Prix in the Lago Talbot roaring past. And there's the TC sitting on the sidelines. The subsequent owner, or the previous owner, David Harvey, said to me, "I told Jack how to drive." Jack was a speedway driver. It was a 200-mile scratch race in hot weather. You had to drive to survive. And that was a very interesting comment. The bottom left-hand corner picture really amuses me, and it's not very big, but you could see the TC with no exhaust pipe, no exhaust system, just 4 stacks sticking out the side of it. Could you imagine what that sounded like? You would not get a license to drive at Sydney Motorsport Park with that car today or anywhere else. But that was how racing was. So on we went, and we went racing. So I might point out that the TC race car was purchased in a joint venture, but it was only a 2-way joint venture. It was Jeff Gaskell and myself. My friend Jeffrey Ross by then was too busy with his Alvis, and I think he was probably distracted by the girls, and he didn't have time or money. So this became a 2-way joint venture. And the bottom left corner shows me at Malala in 1967. I had a CAMS license. I was the CAMS representative of the Adelaide University Car Club. And I remember Don Thompson coming to the meetings, and I think I opposed every single safety thing that they proposed, like roll bars and fire extinguishers and so on, because they thought that the students couldn't afford it. Anyway, it was my introduction to the bureaucracy of motor racing. And the top right-hand photograph is somewhat interesting, and you would think that it was a long time ago, but it was only 2004 when the organisers were able to allow young ladies to wander around the paddock and to lift the spirits of the hardworking mechanics and drivers. Anyway, that was also at Mallala, can you believe, all those years later. So that's my start. And then years go on, we travelled, and I started thinking, actually, I need an older car. Maybe I need one of those K3s. And I think I probably looked at maybe half of the whole production run in my search. And, you know, they're all like grandfather Zach's, not all, but nearly all. And they're quite expensive. And I didn't succeed in finding something available and affordable. And the two right-hand photographs tell a story. The bottom one is the reenactment of the Lobethal Grand Prix in South Australia, and the K3's there on the left in the hands of Philip Brady. And the Brady family had the K3 for 51 years, from 1958. And of course, they were like part of the furniture. I never imagined that car would become for sale, but we went to a dinner after the Lobethal event, and Helen sat next to Phil. And that evening she said, you know what? The one you want is under your nose. And how could you expect to get cooperation like that from a wife? Well, she was right. It started off a rather lengthy negotiation, and it made me very interested in the story of Vera and the history and all the other things Vera did. But that's how we ended up with the K3. Next one. So it was, no offence to Philip, but it was not in very good condition. But it was very original. And but to get it going the way I wanted, and I wanted to be able to race it, we had to do a lot of things. And we had to be able to test it and make sure it worked properly. And we took it to a number of tracks, firstly with regularity, which is a fantastic thing that we do in Australia. It gets a lot of old cars out that wouldn't otherwise A, qualify, or B, the drivers would qualify or be interested. So I managed to do a lot of track miles in regularity. We got it reliable. Then we started to race it. And the left-hand photograph there is very significant. I think Richard Townley might be on the call, but Richard is the proud owner of the Curly Bryden MGTC, which came second in the Grand Prix at first Grand Prix at Albert Park in 1953, when the K3 came third. I think in this photograph, it actually shows the proper sequence of events, but we had a lot of fun together running in the same races. And the photograph on the top right, it actually gets quite a bit of credit for getting me interested in going overseas. I actually beat Andrew Cannon in his Bugatti at Winton. And Andrew, most of you will know, is the Honorary Consul General for Monaco in Australia. And he came up to me afterwards. He said, Jesus, John, that car goes pretty well. He said, you know, you should go to Monaco. He said, let me know. I'll get you an invitation. And I thought, wow, could I do that? Anyway, that was about 2015, a couple of years before or 14 or something. You could see how much it's admired in New South Wales, because the poster down in the right-hand corner, I'm not sure who drew that. Jeff, you know knowledge about that. But that event took place in 2017, and I wasn't even there. And my car was on the poster. So there we go. Next, please. Now, I told you I was going to give you a little bit of background on how important MGs have been to the world of motoring. And so just bear with me. Did you know that MGs have been in the top 3 places at every Grand Prix in Australia from 1933 to 1954? except Bathurst. Don't know why Bathurst missed out, but must have been that long straight, I think. MG had quite a record of winning, and including in 1953, when the K3 came third or second. I'll just explain the controversy to you. The number one, the Lego Talbot, reportedly was ran into the gravel and was assisted by spectators jumping over the fence and pushing him back on the track, which just wasn't allowed even in those days. But for some mysterious reason, the protest didn't get to the starter, so the position stood. But the newspapers the following day were full of this controversy. So it's just possible the true placings were 1, 2, 3. So what's happening now these days? Well, historic racing, even MGB's historic now, as you know, is still going strong. Groups K and L, the home of the old MGs, and for many years, Group L was probably held up by MGs, but the numbers are thinning. So, next one, please. So I end up with two cars. Can you believe they both actually ran together at Nurielpur and at Albert Park? The TC's claim to fame became second in the Australian Grand Prix in 1950. And it did run at Albert Park, which is the first FIA race in Australia. That's when CAMS was established. The K3, of course, had a famous start with Vera and came to Australia when it became obsolete in the UK, obviously. There were two reasons for that, I think. The K3s had been so successful that the organisers, I mean, I didn't think that the Brits were so devious, but the organisers changed the rules so that cars could not run superchargers. So the K3 wasn't really able to compete from 1936 onwards. But mind you, MG is smart. They created a racing car out of the N-type and went on to win the races with the NE model without a supercharger. But so the K3 came to Australia at the end of 1936 in the hands of a New South Wales guy by the name of John Snow, who brought a lot of cars in, and John Medley, who's involved with the Federation, has written a book about him. And then it went on and it raced in every Grand Prix up to 1955. So and these two cars effectively have raced every year of their lives, and they're still racing and are still logbooked. And the TC has been out on the racetrack twice this year in Victoria and once last year, at the end of last year, at Sydney Motorsport Park. And it would have been out more, but the entries have all been cancelled. But I'm hopeful there's going to be a Sandown race before the end of the year and a Rob Roy hill climb, and the TC will be there too. Okay, next one. So part of the history of this car and its sort of reputation, particularly in Europe, is that it was the first racing car of Prince Birabongse, the grandson of the King of Siam. And this story about him has been told in books and so on. It seems like a fantasy of the 1930s. As I understand it, they went to Eton and Cambridge, but they never bothered to get a job. Their main job seemed to be buying new racing cars and building up the White Mouse garage. But this was the first racing car that Bira, who was the younger cousin, had. The older cousin was sort of like his guardian, I think some guardian, and he bought him the K3, I think, for his 21st birthday. So really, Bira had 1 or 1.5 seasons in the K3, and Chula was not to be taken lightly. He was one of the first buyers of Raymond May's new ERA. And of course, between them, the K3 and the ERA held up the pride of Britain in the 30s, when the big races were being won by the Germans and the Italians, and the French were hopefuls. So that's the story. There's some pictures there of Bira himself and him at Brooklands and him at Donington in 35 and 36. Next one, please. So the K3 came to Australia, and there were 3 K3s in Australia in the 1930s. Number 2 is the one that's owned by Adam Berryman. I'm not sure if he's on the line here today, but tonight I did speak with him today. And that's got a famous, fantastic history. It was one of the 3 millimetre team cars. It was the hare, it was the one sitting out ahead. So the Maseratis all went chasing him, and they all blew up, as did the number 2 K3, and the others came in behind and won the team prize. Number 16 was brought into Australia by Lister Jackson in the mid-30s, most famously raced by Otto Stone. And anyone who knows about K3s generally in the 30s, in the 40s and 50s would say, oh, Otto Stone's car. Unfortunately, that left Australia in about 2000, but I can say it's in the hands of a very enthusiastic and active owner in Howard Maguire in England, and I have actually driven that car, only a short distance. He didn't trust me to drive it too far. And of course, number 30. Now, somebody asked me, and I thought this was unnecessary even to say, what are all those numbers about? Well, as you probably all know, MG named their series by letters all through their production period, and the first letter was the type, and the second letter was usually the modification. Well, the K type had the racing model was the K3, and then they numbered their sequences. Most of the bottles, the sequence numbers started at 251. Obviously, the salesman didn't want someone who was buying number 251 to think they were buying the first one. They'd like to think they were buying the 250th. However, the K3s were different, with the exception of the prototype, and the 4 other K3s came to Australia post-war. The most famous of those are the first 2 there. The number 4, the ex-Billy Cotton car that Ross Kelly owns now, had a fantastic history in England in the 30s. And the second one there, the number 3752, was actually the second prototype. And it was the millimetre route car, and it was sent out ahead of the teams to test the route and test the car. And so that itself is a very famous car. It spent most of its life in Australia with Jim Nielsen in Melbourne, but about a year ago was acquired by Martin Barrett in South Australia. So it's in wonderful hands with Martin. And number 31 came to Australia through Rhodesia in South Africa. And number 3 is one that was rebuilt in the 60s and has been brought to Australia and restored wonderfully by Peter Briggs in Perth. Next one, please. So racing in the 30s must have been amazing. You've all seen the photos, but the crowds that came, it was just something that it was an escape. It wasn't expensive for people to go to. And in Australia, the art of building specials became developed in the 30s. And of course, in the 40s, after the war, when the import rationing meant they couldn't import fancy things, that's why MGs and, frankly, wash your mouth out, flathead Ford V8s were the prize cars on the grids up until the early 50s. But the bottom right-hand corner photograph is interesting. That shows Lobethal in 1940. It suggests that somebody wasn't taking the war very seriously at that point. I think that was January 1940, but even so, it was 1940. Next one, please. Now, I don't expect you to read this in detail. This is the lap chart for the 53 Grand Prix. Now, I've properly altered this. This is something done by CAMS to mark the 60th anniversary. I've altered this by putting Curly Bryden's car, driven by Richard Townley, in the bottom right-hand corner. Instead of all these other cars that came absolutely nowhere and didn't finish. I don't know who in CAMS picked the photos for this program, but they weren't MG enthusiasts, obviously. But you can see there that red mark on the left is where the K3 started, about halfway down through the grid. But you follow the chart. It was obviously an arduous race, 210 miles, I think it was, in hot weather. And MG did what they did often. They survived. So next one. And these cars are still around. For example, the top left corner, top left photo there is at Bathurst in 2015, and MG were very well represented in the first Bathurst races, and this was a reunion event to celebrate the 1938 Grand Prix. And 6 cars, 6 MGs that were in that race, all in going order, racing order, were there. And you can see the NE of Peter Briggs on the right was there. My K3 is on the left. Adam Berryman's number 2 is behind the NE, and there were 3 others, a P-type, an M-type, I think, and an L-type. The other large photograph there tells a big story, because the organisers of the Grand Prix in 2013 made a big thing of the 60 years of racing at Albert Park. There's a lot of people who are behind that. Grant Campbell, he might be on the call tonight, I'm not sure. Lots of people. And they went looking for original cars that were there in that time, and I think there were about 50 on the grid. Well, they found 7 in working order. They found 2 others which were very representative of 2 of the leading cars. But these 2 cars, the number 26 was the Curly Bryden TC, owned by Richard and Laurie Townley, who's Richard's there in the red pullover, and the K3 driven by Andy Brown, South Australian, on the left, and that's me and my wife Helen. And the organisers actually found the original trophies, so wasn't that fantastic? And they made a big thing of it, and I think it was also a fairly good point to make to the government and the community and the yellow shirts who were opposing using Albert Park for motor racing, that we were motor racing there long before they were playing hockey and tennis. The bottom left corner there is Adam Berryman giving me some advice, but the next photo is just as relevant. The next photo shows 4 K3 brothers, and I am so pleased that Philip Douchet, owner of number 26, is there sitting next to me. Adam Berryman's on the left and Ross Kelly on the right. There's a possibility that all 4 of us are on this call tonight. That's a photo taken at Meredith in the Brisbane Ranges, near Ballarat and between Ballarat and, well, Emily's just told me you're all on the call tonight, so welcome. We had coffee running in Brisbane Ranges in MGs. My M-type is in the background, in the black one. And it was so wonderful to do that together, and that's what we do. Next one. So I know you asked me to talk about Europe, so we're going to get to that. I sort of thought, well, how do you go about it? If somebody asked me, how would you go about doing this? Well, there is a long list of things you have to do, surprise. Firstly, you must have a suitable car, and you've got to get the car ready. So I give huge credit to Ray Hughes and his assistant, Tolstoy, there in the bottom right-hand photograph. Ray passed away just a few weeks ago, very sadly. He was an absolute stalwart of MGs, but old cars and vintage cars in general in Melbourne. And they took a very serious view of what this car was going to have to do in Europe, and its reliability has been credit to Ray. But you don't just need a workshop at one end, you need a workshop at the other. And the car is on the hoist there at Paul Myatt's garage in Birmingham. And Paul and his partner, John Bibby, have been absolutely essential to keeping the car on the track. And they used to be supporters mechanics, and Paul used to travel as a travelling, technical man to all the racetracks of Europe with the K3 owner years ago. And so I'm so fortunate to have guys that have been there. And when I first got there, John Bibby said to me in a rather sort of a meek voice of, John, I've just made a list of a few things I think maybe might need to be done. And I said, oh, that's a fantastic list, John, we'll do them all. And that's how we got started, and that's how we kept going. A special mention to Graham Whitehouse, the gearbox man, because the pre-select gearbox is a challenge for the K3. It was probably on the limit of its specification, even in 1933, and we've probably got more power than they had then. But he and I persevered with different linings and different ways of putting it together, and we rotate the gearboxes. Now I've got the original gearbox on the shelf, and I've got 2 spares which I race with, so that's keeping the car original but still racing. Other people that I need to mention are the Brooklands Museum. They helped me get the car into the UK. My initial address was at Brooklands, and they displayed it and looked after it during the winter. They were so excited to have a Vera car there, and I've got a number of photos of it at the museum, and I'm looking forward to it going back there again when we're allowed out of jail. But there's a lot of other logistical issues. Firstly, well, you got to get the car right. You've got to get there, but you've also got to get insured. You've got to have a license, and getting an international license, well, is a procedure, but it's not all that easy. And then in Europe, you've got to be able to race it. You've got to have the right documentation. So the car has got a historic technical passport now, and it's got the BSCC butt form, which is very respected around the racetracks. And you need to be mobile, and you need to be able to handle the logistics, and that depends a lot on friends, and particularly a tolerant and sociable wife. As I said at the top of this slide, the last point is probably the first point. Next slide, please. So the restoration of the car is what you would have all imagined. We just had to do everything. I must say, I didn't expect to have a problem with cams, but I did, and it's over now. But, I think one of the things the foundation could do is perhaps help to keep old cars on the road and keep them registered with cams so they can actually be used. These photographs here, there's Philip Brady at the top. That's me at Collinggrove. That's the first time I ever saw this car in action with Tom Brady. That's Philip's grandfather back when I first got interested in MGs. The third one is the famous brake shoes at Rob Roy. I was involved with a great team to resurrect that hill climb back in about 1990, and it's still going strong. The club's doing a great job looking after that. And the bottom right-hand corner was part of the road testing. That's George Lytle's K1 in front of my K3, and we would go out on Sunday mornings and make sure they came back, and they did. And lastly, I have to recognise Noel and Victoria. They may be on the call tonight too. Really, Noel did a lot of the groundwork to work out how we could actually do this. And he has a Talbot Durac, as some of you probably know, but he wasn't able to get the car going reliably enough by the time I was ready to go in 2016. And so I had to go alone. Unfortunately, I was a bit daunted by that, but Victoria and Noel have been great supporters. Next one. Look, I won't go through this, but the club scene is very active in Europe. A special mention to the Triple M register. Duncan Potter is the competition secretary for the competition of the Triple M register. They've got registered on their books, I think about 40 or 45 pre-war overhead cam MGs in racing condition and with drivers with licenses. And they can regularly front 30 cars on a grid. And that means there's a MG only racing program in the UK, and it's in the process of being extended to Europe. But unfortunately, with the pandemic, a race that we planned to have in Angoulême had to be deferred. Philip Duché has been very active in trying to promote that. But the Triple M register is a fantastic group. There's very strong Triple M and pre-war register fraternity in Australia. I think Malcolm Robertson might be on the call, and Andrew Fock is the current chair of that. And as a result, we have done a very good job in Australia preserving these cars and getting them on the road. The people who've fixed them up are very, very important. Paul Schaller, I think, is on the call tonight. He's at Historic and Vintage in Melbourne, and he did a lot of work. He's done work on a lot of my cars, but he did a lot of work on the K3 in the resurrection of it. And well, it's not lastly and not least at all, but the Historic Grand Prix Cars Association is an absolutely amazing organisation. Their objective is to race and compete with genuine historic racing cars on the major racetracks of Europe. So no specials, they're all cars with histories. And they're fantastic people, all sorts of walks of life and so on, and they're enthusiasts, and Barry's here tonight. Hello, Barry. But that has allowed me, because they've got such a great organisation, they organise the tracks, they organise the grids, and it's hard enough getting there without trying to be anything to do with the organisation. And so I've raced from the east in Czechoslovakia to the north in Denmark, to the south in Portugal and Spain, in France and Holland, a great variety of track types and so on. Even though I'm the slowest car on the track, I'm in class 1, and sometimes as I'm the only one there, so I get to take a prize, but I don't care. I am just racing with the most fantastic people and the fantastic cars. And if only there could be a few more pre-war cars, which is where the HCPCA really started, with a lot of pre-war cars, we'd be better off. And next car, I'm just before the bottom line there, the AMHF Car Club of Switzerland. I probably should put there this MG Car Club of France, but you know, the enthusiasm and the good spirits and ability to have fun of these people is just, you've just got to be there to see it. So we're looking forward to getting back and sharing it again. Next one. So we got there, but you know, getting there is only just the beginning. And my first races and hill climbs were in Ireland and Wales, and there I discovered rain. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to learn to race in the rain if I'm going to be over here. I remember the first race I did at Pembury, I didn't see any of the surrounds. You could barely see the boundaries of the track because of the low cloud, and it rained all day, all for 2 days. By even the Brits, by Sunday afternoon race, there was only 9 in the grid, but there I was. But that taught me something. I said, why do they build a racetrack in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? And nobody gave me the answer to that. But we went on and we went to Prescott, a wonderful place. Lots of you will have been there. To actually be on that track where every famous driver since time began has been, and also Shelsley Walsh. And I had the pleasure of winning my class in both places. That photograph there at the bottom corner is the K3 coming through the cutting at Shelsley Walsh. And I can tell you, it goes fantastically well through there. It's a second gear double S bend, and then up into third gear for a long haul to the finish line. And considering I was against people who'd probably spent their life climbing that hill, I was very pleased with that outcome. The top right-hand corner is a more of a wide view of Prescott, and the picnic atmosphere and everything. It just shows, and I think we could probably do better in Australia, making these events places where people want to come and enjoy. The photo in the middle I put in there, I think, and you can believe me if you want to, but I think it's the only time I've ever been brought back into the pits on the back of a flat top. And that's at Angoulême in France. Can you believe the embarrassment of being hauled back up the hill on the back of a flat top? I didn't actually tell anybody the reason, but I'll just let you into it. The reason was the battery went flat. And there are actually 2 batteries on that car for that very purpose, but I was not a didn't have my wits together so that to switch the battery across to the second battery before I went out. So I had no fuel and I ran out of fuel. So that was 2016, a learning curve. But what we did is we also, because we traveled, yes, you can keep on that one, the touring one, we dragged our K3er along behind our motorhome. And the K3 is a very versatile machine because it can, it was really designed as a road racing car. And it can be very easily stripped. And most of the photos you've seen to date have been without its guards on. But the VSCC allows it to run as a sports car as well as a racing car. So when we were in Italy, we turned it into a rally car. You can see that middle photo with, we rigged up this special, there's absolutely nowhere to put anything in a K3. It's nowhere you can put your gloves or your sunglasses or anything. So we rigged up a baggage bag over the spare wheel and a couple of bags on the back, and off we went. That photo on the top right, I love it because that is the highest habitable village in Europe, according to the Italians, that is. It's on the Italian side, it's just at the foot of the Matterhorn. Actually, just so that we weren't being, there's no dispute, we also went to the highest village in Switzerland. Philippe Duché took us there with the AMHF Club of Switzerland. And I measured them, they claim they're only about 10 metres apart in elevation, and you know, surveyors often get things wrong, so they're just about equal. But just the sheer pleasure of driving that car up a 25-kilometre windy road up the valley, and then the amazement of people when we got there. Middle bottom photograph is the town square at Newtownards in Ireland. And as MG men know, that is where Nuvolari won the Ulster TT in 1933 in a K3. And those 3 K3s there, that number 16 is on the left. That's the one that Otto Stone owned and raced in Australia. My car, number 30, is in the middle, and that's Gerhard Meyer on the right, a German, a very long-term MG enthusiast, and there are several of them in Germany. Came over to that rally, and we were received by the mayor, and the town square's got this wonderful monument. It's got all the lap times and which MGs. There were several races there which are all honoured in that town square. And that's us having a bit of fun in Venice. Okay, next one. So we went on to 2017. So we're getting to be old hands by now. But this is the first year we raced with HDPCA, and so this opened up Europe to us. Our first HDPCA race was in Czech Republic at Most. That's the photograph on the right. The main photo in the middle is at Dijon in France, and you can see the pre-war class there, a Delage, 2 straight-8 Maseratis, and a K3, struggling to keep up. But it's, and Cadwell Park, that's an MG, one of those MG only races is down below. So the Alain Villars hill climb probably should be mentioned. Alain Villars is about 8-kilometre hill climb. Alain is in the valley, Villars is up in the hills, the ski resort, and we went there, and then we used the car on the road and so on. But the year came to an end in winter. The car went back to the Brooklands Museum for storage, and it sat in a prized place in the museum, and we picked it up next year, move on to 18. Picked it up the next year in about March, and did a few of the jobs that were required, and off we went racing again. This year, the HDPCA's first event was in Copenhagen. It was a street event. I have to say a somewhat dangerous track. Because, hello? Yes, so, but it was a fantastic thing to go to Copenhagen. We were the the prime grid for the event, and we were treated by royalty like royalty. That year I won the Mary Harris Trophy race, which is a long-standing MG Car Club race in Britain at Brands Hatch. And that was on the short track, so-called, but HCPCA run on the long track, so I had the opportunity to get the car up to top speed on more than one occasion. And many people ask me what top speed is. Well, it's hard to know, but it's probably about 120 miles an hour. So next one. So we went back to some of the same tracks again. Highlights of this year were again Nürburgring, which is a fantastic Grand Prix track. But I was invited to run on the Nordschleife with the vintage cars, and as you probably know, it's a 25-kilometre lap, and it goes, half of it is downhill and half of it's uphill, and there's a straight which allows you to get to top speed, at least in the K3. And we got 4 laps, so 100 kilometres on the Nürburgring. And I was starting to get the hang of it by then. But someone who really knew it told me you have to do 100 laps before you know the track properly. So the other highlight of that, well, it took probably several highlights, but we ran at Pau, which is a city in the south of France in the foothills of the Pyrenees. Again, a place where Grand Prix have been run for a long time. Like street tracks, rather tight, and sometimes the bridge abutments and the buildings are a little bit close, but it was a great experience. And the other great experience was to go to Corsica. Now, by this year, we'd decided that our L-Type, which is a 6-cylinder MG, with the engine, which was the donor engine for the K3, we sent it over because we said, well, we're doing all these road things and the K3 is not exactly the most comfortable. And so we're able to do several rallies in 19 in the L-Type. So at the end of 19, we were getting all saddled up to do some good things in 20. We had an invitation to a race at Monaco in the Grand Prix, historic Grand Prix there in April. That was cancelled. We were invited again in 21. The event was not cancelled, but as you all know, we're all locked in here, and the actual logistics of getting the car out of Britain and across to Monaco was a bit beyond us. So hopefully, they've still got some of my money, so I hope that the car and me and the event will allow that to happen in 22. That's a big hope for us. Okay, so that's the last of the years, but I'll just quickly zip through a few things here. Because you can't, how can you compress all these experiences into a few slides? On the left there is Duncan Potter and his wife in a famous C-type MG. And for those of you who know, the C-type was probably the car that put MG on the map racing-wise. And that car 2 weeks ago was the prize display at Goodwood. And part of the reason was it did well there, but it was owned by the then Lord March, and the current Lord March, grandson of that guy. And of course, the original Lord March was the one who created Goodwood Track after the war when Brooklands became unavailable. Anyway, so Duncan and his wife and Philippe and Helen and I all went to Corsica, and with Philippe's brother and a whole lot of other crazy people, we had a fantastic week. You should go to Corsica if you haven't been there, but just watch out. I think the pirates are still there though. Just for comment, Philippe is in the top right-hand corner as well with his 1934 Maserati. And my recollection, Philippe, as you told me, that was the car that was the competitor for the K3 at the time. As a man who owns both, I don't think I'm misquoting him. He says the K3 is much better. And the other photo there with the two ladies is just an example of the amazing quality of people that end up in the old car game. That is Carl Wiesman, a very famous and erudite medical professor and leader of oncology of the lung. In his spare time, he's found time to write a 250-page book on the history of the MG racing cars, and he owns 3 R-types, and those of you who know what an R-type is, they only made 8, and they were the independent suspension MG that was cancelled because they were losing too much money, and that's his partner Christina. But you know, you could fill a whole night of talking about the people and the friends we've made. Next one. That's Duncan's wife and Helen at lunch. Now that just represents when you go on a rally in France or Switzerland or Ireland or anywhere, Holland, the social side is very, very important, and particularly lunch, and dinner, and the parties, and the music, and etc., etc. Next one. My tastes do stretch into the post-war era, and we drive these cars all over the place. Mountains, they're good in mountains. The MJ twin cam is probably, I even have to say, despite the TC being what it was post-war, is the MJ twin cam is the best post-war MG. But I do have a V8 MGB, where they probably should have made more of them, but anyway. Next one. Next one. This is Helen. This is the twin cam in the Grampian Mountains near Melbourne, named after the famous Scottish Grampians, and they look a bit like that, but a bit drier and a bit warmer, I think. Last one. Look, in putting this together, it just brought back so many memories, and something going right back to those early days, and a realisation of how many people have helped us so much to get to do what we did. Hopefully we've shared a bit of the fun with a few of them, and I've actually avoided putting names into this presentation because you don't know where to stop. But I couldn't finish without acknowledging Alistair Jarvis, who has been so kind to us in helping us in the UK. He's for his sins, he's a Lancia man, but he has also had friends who had MGs and ERAs in the past, so he knows what we're on about. So there's a lot of